Hey everybody, happy Friday. The weekend is almost here. Now today we're going to be talking about emotional triggers and how I use them in language learning to make sure that I get things done, and especially when I'm faced with those difficult decisions where I have a really important project or something else that's really valuable, but I know that I need to make time for language learning. These can be really helpful. So without further ado, let's jump in. Now, this video topic actually was born out of my very first language learning diary entry on my Patreon page, where I'm basically just writing these weekly reflections on my language learning. That was the first one of these entries, and it was really interesting, and we had a really good discussion in the comments, and so that's where this video idea was born. So just so you know, I did just post my second entry, so anyone who's on Patreon or would like to join it, please feel free to visit that page, link in the description. So what are emotional triggers? Now, I will say that this is my current understanding of emotional triggers, and it's how I have been using them over many years. But if you remember, on Monday, I did a video all about the science behind how sleep impacts our ability to learn languages, and I discussed how I really want to do a lot more content where I actually dig into academic papers and scientific research and do my best to sort of extract and distill any learnings I can and share that information with the community, because I do want to start promoting more scientifically based information being shared and not only personal opinions. So this video is based on how I currently understand emotional triggers and how I use them, but I'm happy to take feedback from any of you with more expertise, and I'm also going to follow up with a video where I'll actually dig into the science and see if there are any additional learnings that we can have. So for me, emotional triggers are essentially usually, I think, sort of external triggers that we can build up into our lives and sort of train ourselves so that when that thing happens, we have literally an emotional trigger, an emotional change that happens, ideally in a very positive way that helps us to accomplish a certain goal. So naturally, these things are great if the thing that we want to do is, let's say, difficult. Maybe it's something that's not super pleasurable, but it's the kind of activity that we just know that we need to do. So one example might be you have the activity of watching a drama in Korean, or the activity of studying Korean grammar. Now, you know, it might be a lot easier to motivate yourself to watch that Korean drama, but you also know you need to study grammar. And so what you might do is try to build an emotional trigger that helps you to make sure that when it comes time to do that, whether it's every day, whether it's a few times a week, whatever you decide, there is this thing you can do that gives you that emotional trigger, and you think, yes, you know what? I'm excited to do Korean grammar today. Now, let me give you an example from outside of language learning that I've always thought was really interesting, and I think this will give you some really good ideas of ways that you could use these for yourself. So I remember talking to a friend of mine who also used to make YouTube videos, and the funny thing is that he had his whole setup downstairs in the garage. He had a wall painted white, he had all the lights set up, and so that was his way of like not cluttering the house, and his wife was totally fine with things being done down in the garage. But you know, the garage was cold, and also filming YouTube videos is quite laborious, and especially people who don't enjoy filming, it can be very difficult to motivate yourself to just do the thing. Now, the thing that he found was that putting on his shoes became an emotional trigger, right? So occasionally it'd be really difficult because he would be cozy on the couch, it's the evening, he's had a long day, but as soon as he put on his shoes to go down into the garage, that was like, it was too late to turn back. He knew that at that point, all right, we're going down, we're gonna film this video. And so what happened is, for him, it was a lot easier to motivate himself to just go and put on his shoes than it was to film the video. So what he would do is, when he would think, oh, it's time to film a video, instead of focusing on the really difficult thing, the thing that was, you know, hard to find motivating, he would focus on that much easier task of, let's go put on our shoes. And at that point, that was his trigger, and it worked really well, and he made loads of videos, and it was really interesting to hear this story. And so I wanted to tell you that story because an emotional trigger, at least how I understand it, it can really be anything that helps you to sit down and study. Now, for me, what I often find is I tie this to things that I find really pleasurable. So having a cup of coffee, as you will all know by now, that's something that I really enjoy. And so for a long time, what I would do is I would associate sitting down at my favorite coffee shop with a cup of coffee in the morning with studying Swedish. And I did this for many months. And so no matter what was going on, no matter how busy I was, no matter how crazy work was, it didn't matter. Because when I sat down with that cup of coffee, I knew it's time to study Swedish, and nothing else really mattered. And I knew that I could deal with everything else after I did my Swedish studies, but it was really helpful to have that. Now, one other thing that I wrote about in my diary entry on Patreon, that I don't know if this counts as an emotional trigger because it's something I generate internally inside of me. But what happened is, these last few weeks I've been working on Journaly. I've been having my job has been really busy. I'm still studying data science. I'm actually starting a course with MIT in September for a couple months where I'm going to be doing data science. And so I have all these things that are really competing with my language learning activities, but those are still one of my biggest priorities in life, and they're one of my greatest joys in life. And so I'm often faced these days with that really hard question, which is, it's time to study, right? And I was doing my Mandarin last week. I was reading my graded reader, and I knew that I had told myself I would also make time to do my German Babel studies. And I was having a bit of a hard time switching, right? But what happened is that while reading my Mandarin graded reader, I was kind of immersed in this idea of Shanghai. I've never been to China or any Chinese-speaking country, but I was imagining the city of Shanghai where the story's taking place. I was really into it. And when I finally switched over to German, immediately I had this amazing sort of emotional reaction where I found myself imagining Hamburg, where I used to live. I lived in Hamburg. It was one of my favorite cities I've ever lived in. I was very happy there, and I have very fond memories of Hamburg. And so what I found is that, first of all, having had that experience over and over again, this very positive experience, almost like traveling the world in a single cup of coffee, where I start in Shanghai and then next thing you know, I'm in Hamburg and I'm still drinking that same cup of coffee. Maybe I'm on a second cup by then, but you get the idea. Having had this very, very positive experience, it helps me because whenever I'm struggling to be motivated, I can always generate this emotional trigger inside of myself because all I have to do is imagine this amazing experience that I'm about to have. And all I have to do is go and sit down in my cozy sort of breakfast kitchen bar, in my cozy spot, and I just have to have my coffee. And I know that by the time I finish it, I will have gone to several countries and I'm gonna have an amazing experience. So very often I can sort of generate these emotional triggers inside of myself just by knowing that all I have to do is go and sit down with my coffee, and I know I'm gonna have a wonderful experience, and I know from past experience that I'll be glad that I did it. Like I said, I don't know if that counts as a true emotional trigger. I'm not sure if they always have to be some external stimulus, but I'll find out and let you know. But the second thing is that I also find, having these fond memories of a place is also a great emotional trigger for me. So again, if I'm having trouble being motivated to study German, or I'm just having this issue where, I've got so many competing things, honestly, just thinking back to my life in Hamburg, thinking back to the neighborhoods. I used to love Altona, for example, and it's a neighborhood in Hamburg. It's gorgeous. I remember going on an architectural tour of the history of Altona, where we had an architect who took us around the neighborhood, and he taught us all the different things that had happened and how Denmark was at one point in control of Altona, and then Germany took it back. And and we would look at the different features on the buildings, and he would explain how, you see how these windows, like this is a very, French style of architecture that you'll see, and that's because of this. So we had this wonderful tour of Altona, and we explored the history of that neighborhood based on the architecture. I can tell you so many stories. I used to remember running around the Alster, which is the big lake in Hamburg, in the evenings with my friend Azza, and we would actually, we would speak very broken Farsi. I was learning Persian at the time because some of my best friends in Hamburg were from Iran. The point is, all I have to do is think back to these fond memories I have, and that's enough. I think, yes, you know what? I want to go study German right now because I want to take myself back to that place. So that's, of course, one that, depends on if you've been to a place or if you have those kind of memories. But I will say it also works for French. Now, I've been to France, but I've also just had some of the most delightful experiences simply studying French, reading novels in French in my hometown in the UK. I told a story recently where I actually showed you a picture of my hometown, a bench right next to Minster Pool where I used to sit and read French novels. Even that, if I think about that moment and that cozy, comfortable feeling of reading a French story, and getting lost in it, that's enough. So it doesn't have to be a memory that's in the place where a language is spoken, but I think if you have fond memories of going somewhere or studying the language, just really stopping and seeing if you can immerse yourself back in that moment. I don't know. I'm not sure that makes sense, but that also really helps me. And it feels like an emotional trigger because it's not the thing I want to do or accomplish, but if I think about it, then that helps me be motivated to go and accomplish my goal. Okay, everybody, so I hope that was helpful. Again, it was really popular on Patreon. We had a great discussion in the comments, so I would love to bring that here now and see if any of you have your own experiences, your own tips and tricks. Have you used emotional triggers for language learning? Let me know down below, and I will see you back here on Monday for another video.